section a period of time about trying to build and make sure that our church is a safe place. We've talked about the fact that we need to be able to encourage each other during times of suffering, that aids in us creating an environment that feels safe and secure. And we began last Sunday to talk about the fact that we need to understand some of the nature of our world if our church is going to be a safe place. And I feel a need to kind of real quickly revisit some of the things we ran through last week just to get up to speed. So we talked about the fact that our times are a-changin, that we live in this postmodern period of time in which we have moved from being a Christian nation to a nation that is barely biblically tolerant at all. Interesting, as did you catch some of the words of that song that we sang? There were words in there about self-control, about commands. I'll bet that song's not sung much anymore. If it is, I bet they leave out some of those verses. Our world has changed. People used to understand that changing times did not mean that everything changed. There were certain things that were perceived as being solid, unchangeable things. Things like morality, things like citizenship, church, and family. Certain things were unchangeable, and those became anchors, if you will, to which all of the other changes in the world were connected. Well, postmodernism has pulled up the anchor points. And so now what we literally have is we have a mentality that has put our nation, along with the rest of the world, that we're just adrift. We're just bouncing along in our existence. There are no more anchor points. Postmodernism holds that its goal is to remove all moral judgments from American society, fostered by relativism and all the other isms that are present. No one has any right to tell anybody else what they ought to do, and that's where our society is wrestling today. There are no absolute truths, and postmodernism has just, because biblical truth attacks their very roots, they have to become antagonistic and exhibit animosity towards the Bible itself. Postmodern philosophies which are raising havoc in our legislature, our judicial, and our executive branches of our representative government. Our politicians now struggle not with issues of constitutionalism, right or wrong, they struggle with relativism, postmodernism, and all you have to do is listen to the nightly news and you will be made aware that those are the major issues that our politics are dealing with today. No longer is it a matter of the right and wrong standard with which they wrestle. Progressivism has got us to believe that any new idea has to be better than Postmodernism denies that there's any need for a constant, any need for a standard, that change can just happen on its own. It doesn't need to be implemented around any anchor points. Okay, I have a question for you. Last week I said, when I made this point, I said, postmodernism would have us be convinced that a computer is better than a typewriter, simply because it's new. Now I have this little video clip that I want to show you, and for some of you it will not make a lick of sense, and for some of you it will. I've slowed it down, slow motion. You should see the faces on these young people up here. They're going, why is that gal pushing her monitor off the table? Okay, let me come back to my question. Is there a constant between a computer and a typewriter? Are all things new free from any standard? Is there a constant between a computer and a typewriter? Absolutely, there are many. The whole gist of that video, it's actually on the internet, it's called A Blonde Returns to Work After 30 Years, is what it's called. I don't know why it's called that, Tanya, but that is what it's called. Back in the day when you had to type with a manual typewriter, you pushed keys down And as you did, as the letter printed onto your paper, the carriage moved one space. As you finished a line, the carriage had slid all the way to the left. And what did you have to do? You had to hit that lever and bring it back over. That was called a carriage return. Do you know that every computer still does that? But now it's called what? It's called a hard enter. You hit a little enter key that has an arrow on it, and your computer does that. And your computer recognizes that is a carriage return. And that document sets in its language that anytime that page is opened, there is a carriage return at that point. What would happen if your computer did not have a carriage return? We would have some long lines. They would go on without end. Does there need to be a constant between a typewriter and a computer? And that's just one. The keyboard. What would happen if every manufacturer of a computer decided they would come out with their own keyboard? What if Hewlett-Packard had one design and Compaq had another design and IBM came up with another design? What if every manufacturer had their own keyboard style? Boy, it'd be a world of hurt, wouldn't it? How about letters and numbers and symbols? How about if they decided to come up with a new set for English and you typed and it looked like Chinese? Well, there are constants. There are constant unchangeables even between an ancient typewriter and a brand new IBM iPad. There are similarities. There are constants. But you see, that logic is we're told we should throw that logic out when it comes to our values, our morals, and the essence of social law. We are told as long as you have a new idea, it should not have any tie to anything that is old. But such is not logical. It cannot be. I mentioned last week that I treasure my American citizenship as much as anybody else, and Sam has mentioned some things even this morning, but it disturbs me to watch as our society goes down that trail. What does the future hold for a nation that continues down that trail? I don't know. We looked at this passage and it was read for us earlier this morning. We are in the last days, but we've been in the last days since Paul wrote Timothy that he was in the last days. Things are always going to be this way. Society is always going to go this route. As I mentioned last week, America is somewhat unique in that we were an experiment whereby our governing powers decided to attempt to include Christian truths in their system of social government. And so we sing about God blessing America and shedding His grace on us because of that experiment. But Paul's words sound like they could be written for us today. We need to find some balance amid all of the turmoil of our world. And we looked at this proverb where it says, "Do not fret because of the evildoers." We talked about the fact that the word that is used there has to do with being heated or becoming warm or glowing. In other words, we need to not be obsessed about what's going on about us. We talked about the fact that we need to have a balance, and that perhaps some balance is even offered in this passage that Paul wrote to Titus, where we recognize that we ourselves were one time foolish and alienated. We acted just as irresponsible as our society at large acts, but we have received mercy, we have received grace, we have received a standard by which we can anchor our lives, and so we now live differently. But again, a balance is what is needful. While Mosaic law was indeed given as a law to govern a nation, God was making a people. And that's why when you read through your Old Testament and get to the book of Leviticus, you want to skip it. Because it's all about the laws. that governed that nation, down to dealing with individual situations of loss and down to sewage system. It's all given. Why? Because that's what the Mosaic Law was for. But Christ's teaching, the new law, was never given for a nation. It was given for an individual heart. That's where it's supposed to have its influence. This was prophesied back by Jeremiah in Jeremiah 31. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after these days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. God says there's a time coming when I'm not going to be concerned about ruling a nation. I'm going to be concerned about ruling a life. And I'm going to be an individual's God, and he's going to be mine, and she's going to be mine. That's what God was saying I desire. That's what I long for. So, as disturbing as all of the path of America might be, as disturbing as all of the influences of modern society might be, as troublesome as it might be for parents to now raise by a standard that our world no longer proclaims, as troubling as all of that is, there is something that is far more concerning than the downward path that postmodernism may be putting America into. And that is postmodernism's ability to corrupt the church, the people of God, the very individuals that God said, I will be their God and they will be my people, and allow those people to fail to connect to God's approved standard, to anchor to God's truth and to His sovereign Scripture. That is a far more dangerous path than any path that America is going to be on. The more postmodern the church becomes, the weaker it appears in the eyes of the world. And folks, we better get that one. The more like the world we become, in the eyes of the world we are weaker. Christianity was not made for a nation. It was made for individuals. Individuals who are to stand out amid whatever nation they live in. Be it dictatorship, be it a representative democracy, we are to stand out as those people that belong to God. As the church begins to take a postmodern approach to Scripture and how we interpret Scripture, we corrupt the message from the Father of all truth. We corrupt the message when we begin to utilize postmodernism as a method of examining Scripture. You know, the danger here is that we're so enamored with postmodernism on every front. Our kids get it in school on a daily basis, not just doses of it. It is being crammed down their throats. They graduate from our public school system and they make a decision to higher their education. And all that does is intensifies the more postmodernistic theories to be shoved down their throats. And the bad thing is, they pay for that. But you still have to hear it, right?